I'm Garrett, 32, and 5 years ago my entire family abandoned me on what should have been the happiest day of my life. My wedding day. My sister Natalie told them I had repeatedly tried to seduce her husband Brett. It was a complete lie, but they believed her without question. I lost my family, my reputation was shattered, but my fiancée Rachel still stood by me. What would you do if your own blood betrayed you, then expected forgiveness when their lies finally caught up to them? Before I dive deeper into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had to stand up for the truth when everyone else believed a lie. Trust me, what happened next will show you why staying true to yourself always pays off in the end. Growing up, we were what most people would call a close-knit family. My parents, Gerald and Martha, raised us in a comfortable suburban home in Michigan. My sister Natalie is 3 years younger than me, and from the very beginning, there was always something different about how our family operated. Natalie was the undisputed favorite child. It wasn't anything my parents ever admitted outright, but the signs were impossible to miss. When we were kids, her accomplishments were celebrated with elaborate parties, while mine usually received a pat on the back and a "Good job, son." When I made varsity baseball in sophomore year, my dad nodded approvingly. When Natalie made cheerleading squad the same year, my parents took the entire family out to the fanciest restaurant in town. Looking back, I can see a pattern that I was blind to for most of my life. Natalie learned early on that she could manipulate situations to her advantage. If we ever fought as kids, somehow I would end up being the one apologizing, even when she clearly instigated the conflict. She mastered the art of the victim narrative before she was even 10 years old. "Garrett pushed me," she would cry, conveniently leaving out that she had been pinching me for the past 5 minutes when no one was looking. By the time I tried to explain, the damage was done. I was the bad guy. The older brother who should know better. Despite this, I loved my sister. I truly did. And for the sake of family harmony, I learned to overlook her more manipulative behaviors. I became the peacekeeper, the one who would swallow his pride to keep everyone happy. This dynamic followed us into adulthood, though I didn't realize how dangerous it would become. Natalie married Brett when she was 24. He seemed like a decent guy, stable job in finance, polite to our parents, and he appeared to genuinely care for my sister. I was happy for her, though we weren't particularly close by then. I had my own life, my own career as an architect at a respected firm in the city. I was building a name for myself, designing sustainable commercial buildings that had started to get attention in the industry. Then I met Rachel. She was a pediatric nurse with a laugh that could light up a room and a compassion that seemed limitless. We met when I was designing a new children's hospital wing, and she was consulting on the functionality of the space. I knew within weeks that she was the one. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. Looking back, that's when the first warning signs appeared with Natalie. When we announced our engagement at a family dinner, everyone seemed genuinely happy for us. Everyone except Natalie. She smiled, of course, and said all the right things, but there was something cold in her eyes. At the time, I dismissed it as my imagination. As wedding planning progressed, Natalie's behavior grew increasingly strange. She would make passive-aggressive comments about Rachel's choices for the ceremony. "Are you sure you want that dress style? It's not exactly flattering on your figure." Or, "That venue seems a bit ambitious for your budget." Small cuts, delivered with a smile. Rachel, being the incredible person she is, tried to include Natalie in the planning process. She even asked her to be a bridesmaid, which my sister accepted with what I now recognize as feigned enthusiasm. My parents encouraged this inclusion, constantly reminding me how important it was to keep family close. If only I had paid more attention to the undercurrents. If only I had recognized the jealousy brewing beneath my sister's carefully constructed facade. But I was too caught up in my own happiness, too blinded by my desire to believe the best of my family. I couldn't have imagined the depths to which Natalie would sink to maintain her position as the center of attention in our family dynamic. The months leading up to the wedding were a blur of venue visits, menu tastings, and guest list debates. Rachel and I wanted a relatively small ceremony with about 80 guests, which seemed to irritate Natalie, who had invited over 200 people to her own wedding. "Don't you want everyone to celebrate your special day?" she asked, making it sound like we were somehow failing at getting married properly. In retrospect, I should have seen what was coming. The signs were all there: Natalie's increasing criticism of Rachel, her sudden cancellations when we had planned wedding-related activities, the way she would steer conversations with our parents back to her own life whenever our wedding came up. But I was raised to give my sister the benefit of the doubt, to be the bigger person, to keep the peace at all costs. That ingrained habit would cost me more than I could have ever imagined. May 15th should have been the best day of my life. I woke up early in my hotel room, sunlight streaming through the curtains, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. My phone buzzed with messages from friends who were already on their way to the venue. My best man, Tyler, sent a text saying he'd be at my room in an hour with coffee and breakfast. I tried calling my parents to check if they needed directions to the venue, but the call went straight to voicemail. Not unusual. They were probably busy getting ready. I sent a quick text instead and jumped in the shower, mentally running through my vows one more time. Tyler arrived as promised, and we spent the morning getting ready, sharing stories, and conning my pre-wedding jitters. I kept checking my phone, wondering why my family hadn't responded to any messages. A small knot of worry formed in my stomach, but I pushed it aside. They wouldn't miss this. Not my wedding day. At 11:42 a.m., I'll never forget the exact time my phone rang. It was my father. Finally. "Dad, hey! Are you guys on the way? The ceremony starts in less than 3 hours." The silence on the other end lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. "We're not coming, Garrett." For words that made my world stop spinning. I remember gripping the edge of the desk so hard my knuckles turned white. "What? What do you mean you're not coming? Is someone hurt?" My mind immediately went to accidents, health emergencies, something that would explain such an absurd statement. "How could you do this to your sister?" My father's voice was cold, distant, nothing like the man who had taught me to ride a bike or build model airplanes. "After everything this family has done for you." "Dad, what are you talking about?" The room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "Natalie told us everything. About how you've been pursuing Brett. Making advances on him. She showed us the texts you sent him." Brett confirmed it all. "How long has this been going on, Garrett? How could you betray your own sister like this?" The accusation was so outlandish, so completely divorced from reality, that for a moment I thought it was some bizarre joke. But my father's tone left no room for misinterpretation. He believed what he was saying. "Dad, that's insane. I've never sent Brett any inappropriate texts. I barely talked to him at all. This is completely made up. You know me. You know I would never do something like that. The evidence is pretty clear, son. Brett showed us everything. Natalie is devastated. Your mother can't stop crying. None of us will be at the wedding today. I suggest you take some time to reflect on what you've done to this family." Before I could respond, before I could defend myself or demand to see this supposed evidence, the line went dead. I stood frozen, phone still pressed to my ear, trying to process what had just happened. Tyler watched me with growing concern. "Garrett? What's wrong?" I tried to explain, but the words seemed stuck in my throat. How do you tell someone that your entire family has decided to believe an absolute lie and abandon you on your wedding day? Eventually, I managed to stammer out the basics of the conversation. Tyler's reaction mirrored my internal state: confusion, disbelief, then anger. "That's complete bullshit. Let me call them." He reached for his phone, but I stopped him. "No. I need to handle this myself." I spent the next hour frantically trying to reach anyone in my family. My mother's phone went straight to voicemail. My sister wouldn't answer. I even tried calling Brett, but no response. I called cousins, aunts, uncles, anyone related to me who might be able to talk sense into my parents. Most didn't answer. Those who did seemed uncomfortable, saying things like, "This is between you and your immediate family," or, "I don't want to get involved." With less than an hour before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, I had to make a decision. Rachel deserved to know what was happening. I called her room, breaking the tradition of not seeing the bride before the wedding. When I told her what had happened, she immediately came to my room, wedding dress and superstitions be damned. I'll never forget the sight of her bursting through the door, still in her bathrobe with her hair half done, eyes fierce with protective anger. "This is absolutely ridiculous," she said, pulling me into a hug. "We're getting married today, Garrett. With or without them." And so we did. The ceremony proceeded with a jarring visual, the bride's side filled with smiling, supportive faces, and the groom's side mostly empty chairs. The few friends who had been invited independently of my family seemed confused, shooting me questioning glances that I pretended not to notice. Walking down that aisle without my father beside me, knowing my mother wasn't watching from the front row, feeling the weight of curious stares from Rachel's family, it was like moving through a nightmare. But Rachel's unwavering support kept me going. When she took my hand at the altar, she squeezed it 3 times, our private code for "I love you." During the reception, we had to explain the conspicuous absence of my entire family. We settled on a vague excuse about a family emergency, but I could tell most people didn't buy it. The pitying looks were almost worse than the betrayal itself. That night, back in our hotel suite, the enormity of what had happened finally hit me. Rachel held me as I broke down completely, my body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from the very core of my being. My wedding day, the day that should have been filled with joy and celebration, had become the day my family chose a lie over me. "We'll get through this," Rachel whispered, stroking my hair. "We'll figure it out together." I wanted to believe her. But in that moment, with the wound still fresh and bleeding, I couldn't see how anything would ever be right again. The weeks following our wedding were a blur of pain and confusion. Every morning, I'd wake up hoping it had all been a terrible dream, only to be confronted with the reality that my family had truly abandoned me based on a lie. Rachel and I postponed our honeymoon to deal with the fallout, though dealing with it mostly meant being repeatedly rejected by my own family. I tried everything to reach them. I sent texts explaining that Natalie's accusations were completely fabricated. I wrote emails detailing my side of the story. I even sent physical letters when my digital messages went unanswered. Every attempt was met with silence. When I drove to my parents' house, no one answered the door, though I could see the living room curtain move slightly. They were home. They just couldn't face me. The one time I managed to reach my mother on the phone, her voice was distant and formal. "We need time, Garrett. What you did to your sister, it's not something we can just forgive overnight. Mom, please listen to me. I didn't do anything. Natalie is lying. You've known me my entire life. Do you really believe I would do something like this?" Brett confirmed everything, Garrett. "Are you saying they're both lying? Why would they do that?" I had no answer that would satisfy her. I didn't understand myself why Natalie would fabricate such a destructive lie. The call ended with nothing resolved, and afterward, I discovered they had blocked my number. Rachel's family became our only family connection. Her parents, David and Susan, were confused and angry on my behalf, offering support and practical help as we tried to navigate this new reality. Susan, a family therapist, suggested that Natalie might have some deep-seated issues that had nothing to do with me. "Sometimes people create chaos to distract from their own problems," she said gently. It made sense, but understanding the possible psychology behind my sister's actions did little to ease the pain of betrayal. My mental health took a serious hit. I struggled with depression, questioning everything about my childhood and family relationships. Had my family ever really loved me? Had I missed signs that they would so easily believe the worst of me? I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Lawson, who helped me process my grief and anger. You're experiencing a unique form of loss, Dr. Lawson explained during one session. It's called ambiguous loss. Your family is physically absent but psychologically present. There's no closure because there's been no opportunity for proper resolution. Work became both a refuge and a challenge. I tried to lose myself in architectural designs and client meetings, but my concentration suffered. I nearly lost an important client when I submitted drawings with obvious errors, something that had never happened before. My boss, Martin, called me into his office after that incident. "Garrett, your work has been slipping. What's going on?" I hadn't told many people about the situation with my family, but something about Martin's direct yet concerned approach broke through my defenses. I explained everything, expecting judgment or disbelief. Instead, he listened attentively, nodding occasionally. "Family can wound us more deeply than anyone else," he said when I finished. "Take some time if you need it. Your job will be here when you're ready to fully focus again." His understanding was unexpected and deeply appreciated, but I declined the offer of time off. Work, despite my struggles with it, was one of the few areas of my life that still made sense. 6 months after the wedding, Rachel and I made the difficult decision to move to Denver. The architecture firm had an office there that needed experienced designers, and Rachel found a position at the Children's Hospital. We needed a fresh start, somewhere without the constant reminders of my family's absence. The move helped. We bought a small house in a friendly neighborhood and slowly began building a new life. We made friends who knew nothing about my past, people who accepted us at face value. I took up hiking in the mountains, finding peace in the physical exertion and natural beauty. Rachel joined a book club and volunteered at an animal shelter on weekends. Gradually, I began to heal. The sharp pain of betrayal dulled to a persistent ache that I learned to live with. Rachel and I grew even closer through the adversity, our bonds strengthening as we faced this challenge together. I often told her she could have had an easier life with someone else, someone without my family drama. "I didn't marry you for easy," she would say. "I married you for love. For better or worse, remember?" Despite the progress, trust remained difficult. I became hypervigilant about friendships, always watching for signs that people might turn on me without warning. Dr. Lawson helped me work through these issues, but some scars run too deep to ever completely heal. Holiday seasons were particularly difficult. Thanksgiving and Christmas had always been important family gatherings in my childhood home. The first year, we accepted an invitation from Rachel's parents, which was lovely but underscored everything I had lost. The following year, we created our own traditions, volunteering at a homeless shelter on Thanksgiving morning, then hosting a Friendsgiving dinner for others who were far from family. For Christmas, we took a vacation to a cabin in the mountains, just the two of us, with no pressure to recreate the elaborate family celebrations of my past. 3 years after the wedding, we had built a life that was fulfilling and meaningful, but the absence of my family remained a void that nothing else could quite fill. I had stopped actively trying to contact them, tired of the rejection and silence. I still sent birthday and Christmas cards, never expecting a response but unwilling to be the one who completely severed the connection. I had accepted that this might be my reality forever, a good life, a loving wife, but a family-shaped hole in my heart that would never heal. And then, completely unexpectedly, everything changed. 4 years and 2 months after my wedding day, I attended an architectural conference in Chicago. Rachel couldn't join me due to her work schedule, so I went alone, planning to network and attend sessions on sustainable design. I had no idea that this ordinary business trip would completely upend my understanding of what had happened to my family. The conference venue was crowded with architects, engineers, and industry suppliers. During a break between sessions, I was examining a display of innovative building materials when someone tapped me on the shoulder. "Garrett? Garrett Wilson? Is that you?" I turned to find Connor Mitchell, Brett's younger brother. I hadn't seen him since Natalie and Brett's wedding years ago. My stomach instantly knotted with tension. Was he here to confront me? To continue the character assassination that had already cost me so much? Connor. I nodded cautiously, already planning my exit strategy. To my surprise, he smiled. Man, it's been forever! How are you doing? Still designing buildings that don't fall down? His casual friendliness threw me completely off balance. Did he not know about the accusations? About the family rift? I responded with vague pleasantries, uncertain how to navigate this unexpected encounter. Are you here for the whole conference? Connor asked. We should grab a drink later, catch up properly. Under normal circumstances, I would have made an excuse. The last thing I wanted was to socialize with someone connected to the people who had caused me so much pain. But curiosity got the better of me. Did Connor know something I didn't? Had he believed the lies about me? I agreed to meet him at the hotel bar that evening. After a few beers, with the initial awkwardness fading, Connor mentioned casually. So, I heard Brett and Natalie finally called it quits last year. Can't say I'm surprised, to be honest. I nearly choked on my drink. They got divorced? Connor looked at me strangely. Yeah, about a year ago. Brett moved to Seattle afterward. I figured you'd know, being Natalie's brother and all. We haven't been in touch for a while, I said, the understatement of the century. Connor nodded slowly, seeming to pick up on the tension. Family stuff, huh? Been there. He took another sip of his beer, then added. Between you and me, Brett's much better off without her. The things that came out during that divorce, man. What things? I tried to keep my voice neutral, though my heart was racing. Connor leaned forward, lowering his voice despite the noisy bar. Turns out Natalie had been cheating on him. Multiple times, with different guys. One of them was my old friend Kevin. He shook his head in disgust. Known the guy since high school? Some friend, right? The room seemed to tilt slightly. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. When did this start? The affairs? From what Brett told me, at least 3 years before they split. Maybe longer. He paused, studying my face. You really didn't know any of this, did you? I shook my head, unable to find words. 3 years before they split would mean Natalie was likely cheating around the time of my wedding. Around the time she accused me of making advances on her husband. Connor seemed to connect the dots himself. Wait, is this why you and your family aren't speaking? Something to do with Natalie and Brett. I didn't know how much to share, how much to trust him. But the alcohol and the years of carrying this burden alone loosened my tongue. I told him everything. The accusations, my family's rejection, the wedding day abandonment, the years of silence. Connor's expression shifted from confusion to shock to anger as I spoke. When I finished, he let out a long, low whistle. Jesus, Garrett. That's fucked up. You believe me? I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. Of course I believe you. Look, I love my brother, but he was blind when it came to Natalie. She had him wrapped around her finger. And after what came out during the divorce. He shook his head. I wouldn't put anything past her. Including making up stories to deflect attention from her own shit. A weight I'd been carrying for years suddenly felt lighter. Someone connected to the situation believed me. Someone else thought Natalie was capable of such manipulation. I think, Connor said carefully, she might have made up those accusations to preemptively discredit you. If you ever found out about her affairs and tried to tell Brett, he wouldn't believe you. She poisoned the well. The theory made a horrible kind of sense. Natalie had effectively isolated me from the family, ensuring that if I ever discovered her infidelity, no one would listen to me. Does Brett know about the accusations against me? I asked. I don't know, Connor admitted. But I can give you his contact info if you want to reach out. He's in a much better place now, might be willing to hear your side of things. As the evening ended, Connor wrote Brett's email address and phone number on a napkin. For what it's worth, he said as we parted, I'm sorry about what happened to you. No one deserves that, especially from family. Back in my hotel room, I stared at the napkin for hours, debating whether to contact Brett. Would he even respond? Would he admit his part in destroying my relationship with my family? And most importantly, could this be the key to finally clearing my name? I called Rachel, needing her perspective. She listened quietly as I relayed everything Connor had told me. I think you should contact him, she said finally. Not for revenge or to gloat about his failed marriage, but for closure. For the truth. You deserve that much, Garrett. As always, her clarity cut through my confusion. I drafted an email to Brett that night, keeping it simple and non-accusatory. I explained who I was, though he certainly knew, and asked if we could talk about what had happened between our families. I mentioned meeting Connor but didn't include any details about Natalie's affairs, not wanting to come across as vindictive. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then lay awake most of the night, wondering if I had just reopened wounds better left alone. But Rachel was right, I deserved the truth. And maybe, just maybe, this was the first step toward reclaiming the family I had lost. Brett's response came faster than I expected. The morning after I sent the email, I woke to find a brief message in my inbox. Garrett, I've been hoping you would reach out. We should talk. I owe you an explanation at minimum. I'm in Seattle now but will be in Denver next month for work. Could meet then if that works for you. Brett. I read the message multiple times, trying to decipher the tone, the intent behind the words. I owe you an explanation. Suggested he knew he had played a part in what happened. But what did he plan to tell me? Would it be another web of lies, or the truth I had been seeking for years? After consulting with Rachel, I replied suggesting we meet at a neutral coffee shop near my office. Public enough to keep things civil, private enough for a difficult conversation. Brett agreed, and we set a date for 3 weeks later. Those 3 weeks were some of the longest of my life. I fluctuated between hope that this might finally provide answers and fear that I was setting myself up for more hurt. Rachel helped me prepare, even role-playing potential conversations so I could practice staying calm if Brett tried to deny everything or shift blame. The day of the meeting arrived, and I got to the coffee shop 20 minutes early, choosing a table in the corner where we wouldn't be easily overheard. When Brett walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. The confident, somewhat arrogant man I remembered had been replaced by someone who looked older than his years, shoulders slightly hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. Garrett, he said, extending his hand after a moment of awkward hesitation. Thank you for agreeing to meet. We exchanged brief pleasantries while ordering coffee, but once we were seated, Brett wasted no time getting to the point. I owe you an apology, he said, his eyes meeting mine directly for the first time. What happened before your wedding, the accusations, it wasn't true. None of it was true. Even though I had known this all along, hearing it confirmed after so many years sent a wave of emotion through me so strong I had to grip the table to steady myself. Then why? My voice came out hoarse. Why would you confirm Natalie's lies? You destroyed my relationship with my entire family. Brett's face flushed with shame. I didn't want to. At first, I told Natalie it was crazy, that I wouldn't lie about something like that. But she... He paused, struggling with the words. She had leverage over me. She knew about an inappropriate relationship I'd had with a coworker. Nothing physical had happened, but the texts were inappropriate. She threatened to send them to my boss, to my parents, to everyone we knew. I would have lost my job, my reputation. So I backed up her story. You chose to sacrifice me instead, I said, the bitterness I thought I'd moved past rising to the surface. I did, and I've regretted it every day since. Brett reached into his messenger bag and pulled out a folder. I can't undo what happened, but I can give you this. Inside the folder were printouts of text conversations between Brett and Natalie from around the time of my wedding. In them, Natalie clearly outlined her plan to accuse me of inappropriate behavior. There were also emails where she threatened Brett with exposure if he didn't support her story. She was cheating on me, Brett explained quietly. Had been for at least 2 years by then. I didn't know at the time, but I think she was worried you might have seen something or suspected something. She wanted to discredit you before you could say anything. I had no idea, I said truthfully. I barely saw you two except at family gatherings. I know that now. Brett looked down at his coffee. When I finally discovered the affairs last year, everything fell into place. The divorce was ugly. That's when I found these messages. She'd deleted them from my phone, but they were still backed up to my cloud account. I should have come to you immediately, but I was ashamed and dealing with my own mess. I spent the next hour going through the evidence Brett had brought. There were text messages where Natalie coached Brett on what to say to my parents. Emails where she celebrated how well her plan had worked. Even a message to a friend where she admitted fabricating the whole thing. What about my parents? I asked. Did she manipulate them too? Brett nodded. From what I saw, she told them you had been sending me inappropriate messages for months. She created fake texts from a burner phone and presented them as coming from you. When your parents hesitated to believe it, she broke down crying, saying she'd been trying to protect you by keeping it quiet, but couldn't let you marry Rachel while harboring such secrets. The elaborate nature of the deception was stunning. I had always known Natalie could be manipulative, but this level of calculated destruction went beyond anything I could have imagined. Where is she now? I asked. Last I heard, she moved back in with your parents after the divorce. She's been playing the victim, telling everyone I was abusive and unfaithful. He gave a bitter laugh. The irony would be funny if it hadn't caused so much damage. Before we parted, Brett made copies of all the evidence for me to keep. I've wanted to make this right for a long time, he said. I just didn't know how. If you decide to show these to your family, I'll confirm everything. They should know the truth. On the drive home, my mind raced with possibilities. I now had concrete evidence that Natalie had lied, that the accusations that cost me my family were completely fabricated. But what should I do with this information? Part of me wanted to send copies to everyone in my family immediately. Another part questioned whether it would even matter. They had chosen to believe the worst of me without evidence. Would proof to the contrary really change anything? I decided to take one more step before approaching my parents directly. I reached out to my cousin Jason, who had remained neutral during the family split. He hadn't come to my wedding, but he also hadn't cut contact completely, sending occasional text messages on birthdays and holidays. Jason agreed to meet for lunch the following weekend. When I showed him the evidence Brett had provided, his face went through a range of emotions: shock, anger, and finally deep sadness. I always thought something didn't add up, he admitted. But Aunt Martha and Uncle Gerald were so convinced, and Natalie was so upset. He trailed off, then added, You should know, Natalie told everyone you never tried to contact them after the wedding. That you were too guilty to face them. This final lie felt like a twist of the knife. I sent letters, emails, made calls. I drove to their house multiple times. They blocked my number, Jason. I believe you, he said quietly. And now I have proof. He gestured to the copies of texts and emails spread between us. What are you going to do? I want to talk to them in person, I decided. All of them, together. No more hiding behind phones or emails. They need to hear the truth directly from me. Jason offered to help arrange the meeting, to be the bridge between me and the family that had shut me out. It won't be easy, he warned. Natalie has had them convinced for years. And they've invested so much in believing her version of events. I know, I said. But I can't move forward without at least trying to set the record straight. That night, Rachel and I discussed the best approach. She suggested I organize all the evidence chronologically, creating a clear narrative that even my most resistant family members couldn't deny. She also recommended I prepare emotionally for any outcome. They might accept the truth and beg for forgiveness, she said, or they might find ways to deny it, to protect themselves from admitting how badly they wronged you. You need to be ready for either reaction. Over the next week, I organized everything Brett had given me, adding my own timeline of attempts to contact my family after the wedding. I rehearsed what I would say, trying to find words that would convey the depth of my hurt without alienating them further. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, about clearing my name, about possibly rebuilding what had been so needlessly destroyed. Jason called to confirm that my parents had agreed to a family meeting at their house the following Sunday. Natalie would be there too. They didn't know I was coming. Jason had simply said he needed to discuss something important with all of them together. It was a risk, but we feared they might refuse if they knew I was involved. As the day approached, my anxiety grew. 5 years had passed since I had seen my parents or sister. 5 years of holidays missed, of life events uncelebrated together, of a wound that had never properly healed. But now, armed with the truth, I was finally ready to face them. Sunday morning dawned clear and crisp. Rachel drove me to my parents' neighborhood but waited in the car a block away. We agreed that having her present might make my family more defensive, and this first conversation needed to be just us. She squeezed my hand before I got out. "Remember," she said softly, "no matter what happens in there, you have built a good life. Their reaction doesn't define you." I nodded, grateful once again for her unwavering support. "I'll text you when it's time to come in. I want them to meet you properly, the real you, not the version Natalie probably described." Walking up the familiar driveway felt surreal. The house looked almost exactly the same. My mother's cherished rose bushes still lined the front path. The porch swing where I'd spent countless summer evenings still hung by the door. Only the color had changed, from the pale yellow of my childhood to a more modern gray. Jason met me at the end of the driveway, his expression tense. "They're all inside. I told them I was waiting for someone who needed to be part of the conversation." "How did they react when you mentioned that?" "Curious, mostly. A bit suspicious." He hesitated. "Garrett, I should warn you, Natalie has them pretty convinced that you're the villain in this story. They might not react well at first." I patted the folder tucked under my arm. "That's why I brought evidence." We walked to the front door together. Jason entered first, calling out, "I'm back. And I brought someone you all need to talk to." I followed him into the living room, where my parents and Natalie were sitting. The moment they saw me, the atmosphere changed instantly. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My father stood up abruptly, his face flushing. Natalie's expression shifted from surprise to something harder, more calculated. "What is he doing here?" my father demanded, looking at Jason accusingly. "Please, Uncle Gerald," Jason said firmly. "Just listen to what Garrett has to say. It's important." My mother hadn't moved, frozen in her armchair, staring at me as if seeing a ghost. Natalie stood up, already heading for the door. "I'm not staying for this. I can't believe you would ambush us like this, Jason." "Sit down, Natalie," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I think you know exactly why I'm here." Something in my tone must have given her pause. She hovered uncertainly by the doorway, then slowly returned to her seat, arms crossed defensively. "I know it's been 5 years," I began, looking at each of them in turn. 5 years since you chose to believe a lie that destroyed our family. Today, I'm here to show you the truth." "We know the truth," my father interrupted. "We saw the evidence. The messages you sent Brett were inexcusable. Those messages weren't from me." I opened the folder and laid out the first set of documents on the coffee table. "These are text conversations between Brett and Natalie from the week before my wedding. In them, Natalie explicitly outlines her plan to create fake messages that would appear to be from me." My parents leaned forward reluctantly, scanning the papers. My mother's brow furrowed in confusion. "This could be fabricated," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Keep reading," I urged, laying out more documents. "Here's Brett's written statement confirming that the accusations were false. Here's the timeline of events showing how Natalie threatened to expose Brett's inappropriate work relationship if he didn't support her story." Natalie jumped to her feet again. "This is ridiculous. Brett is just trying to smear me after the divorce. You're going to believe my cheating ex-husband over your own daughter? That's ironic coming from you," I said quietly. considering you convinced them to believe you over their own son. Without evidence. Without even hearing my side of the story. My father was reading through Brett's statement, his expression growing more troubled with each paragraph. Why would Natalie do this? He asked, looking up at me. What possible reason could she have had? Because she was the one having affairs, I said, placing the final set of documents on the table, emails between Natalie and the men she had been seeing behind Brett's back. She was afraid I might have suspected something or seen something. She wanted to discredit me before I could say anything. The color drained from my mother's face as she read the emails. Natalie? She whispered, looking up at my sister with new eyes. Is this true? Natalie's facade began to crack. Those emails are private. Brett had no right to keep them, no right to share them. This is all a setup to make me look bad. They're real then? My father asked, his voice hollow. That's not the point. Natalie's voice rose, taking on the hysterical edge I remembered from childhood tantrums when things weren't going her way. Garrett has always been jealous of me. He's always wanted to turn you against me. Can't you see what he's doing? I remained calm, letting her accusations hang in the air, their absurdity evident in the face of the evidence spread before us. I never wanted to turn anyone against you, Natalie. I just wanted my family. The family you took from me with your lies. My mother was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face as she looked from the documents to Natalie to me and back again. We miss your wedding, she said, her voice breaking. We miss 5 years of your life. Because of lies? Yes, I said simply. I tried to tell you. I called. I wrote letters. I came to the house. You chose not to listen. You blocked his number. Jason added, addressing my parents. He sent cards for every birthday, every Christmas. Did you ever wonder why they always came through the mail instead of being delivered in person? My father looked devastated. We were told you wanted nothing to do with us after the wedding. That you had cut us off out of guilt. Another lie, I said, looking directly at Natalie, who had gone very still, her earlier outbursts replaced by a calculating silence. One of many, it seems. I was protecting this family, Natalie said suddenly, her voice taking on a reasonable, adult tone that contrasted sharply with her earlier outburst. Brett was abusive. He forced me to say those things about Garrett. I was a victim too. It was the moment her mask truly shattered. The sudden pivot to a new lie, a new narrative in which she was still the victim, despite all evidence to the contrary, revealed the person she truly was. My parents saw it too, the manipulation happening in real time, the desperate attempt to salvage her position. That's enough, Natalie, my father said quietly but firmly. The evidence is clear. The text messages are dated before any allegations of abuse. You planned this. You always take his side. Natalie shrieked, the reasonable facade vanishing instantly. Always. Even when we were kids. Poor Garrett, the forgotten son. You have no idea what it's like to live with your perfect brother, always making me look bad just by existing. The outburst stunned all of us into silence. This wasn't the narrative I had grown up with. In my experience, Natalie had always been the favored child, the one whose accomplishments were celebrated while mine were merely acknowledged. Had she truly seen things so differently? Natalie, that's not true, my mother said, sounding genuinely confused. We've always been proud of both of you. Lies. Natalie spat. You think I didn't notice how you bragged about his grades, his sports trophies, his fancy architecture job? Why can't you be more like your brother, Natalie? You never said it out loud, but I heard it anyway. In that moment, I glimpsed something I had never fully understood, my sister's deep-seated insecurity, her distorted perception of our childhood. It didn't excuse what she had done, but it offered a glimpse into the broken thinking that had led to such destruction. Natalie, I said, keeping my voice level, whatever you believed about our childhood, whatever resentments you carried, they didn't justify destroying my relationship with our family. They didn't justify lying about me in such a fundamental way. They didn't justify robbing me of 5 years with the people I love. Love? She scoffed. You left. You moved to Denver and never looked back. Because you gave me no choice, I replied. Every attempt I made to reach out, to clear my name, was rejected. What would you have had me do? Stay in a city where my own family believed I was capable of betraying my sister in the worst possible way? Where I had to explain to friends, coworkers, neighbors why my family hadn't attended my wedding? My father stood up suddenly, walking to the window and staring out in silence for a long moment. When he turned back, his face showed every one of his 63 years. We failed you, Garrett, he said, his voice rough with emotion. We failed as parents. We should have listened to you. Should have questioned more. Should have demanded real proof. Gerald. My mother began, but he held up a hand. No, Martha. We need to face this. Our son came to us repeatedly, begging to be heard, and we shut him out. Based on accusations that, looking at these, he gestured to the papers spread across the table, were clearly fabricated. What kind of parents does that make us? Natalie stood up abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. You're all against me now. Fine. I'll go. That's what you always do, isn't it? I said quietly. When confronted with the truth, you run. You create chaos and then disappear, leaving everyone else to deal with the fallout. She stared at me with naked hatred for a moment, then grabbed her purse and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. In the silence that followed, my parents seemed to age before my eyes. The full weight of what they had done, believing Natalie without question, cutting me out of their lives entirely, missing 5 years of my life, seemed to settle on them physically. Can you ever forgive us? My mother asked finally, her voice small and uncertain. It was the question I had imagined being asked countless times over the years. In my fantasies, sometimes I had magnanimously forgiven them instantly. Other times, I had rejected their apologies with the same finality with which they had rejected me. The reality was more complicated than either scenario. I don't know, I answered honestly. I want to. But trust isn't rebuilt in a day. 5 years of hurt doesn't disappear with one conversation, no matter how necessary that conversation was. My father nodded, accepting this difficult truth. We understand. We don't deserve immediate forgiveness, but we would like the chance to try to make things right. If you're willing. I thought of Rachel, waiting patiently in the car a block away. Of the life we had built together, the strength we had found in each other when my family had abandoned us. There's someone you should meet properly, I said. My wife. The woman who stood by me when no one else would. The woman who has been my only family for 5 years. If we're going to try to rebuild anything, it starts with you getting to know her, the real her, not whatever version of her you've been told about. My mother wiped her tears and nodded. We would like that very much. I texted Rachel, asking her to join us. As we waited for her arrival, the four of us, my parents, Jason, and I, sat in a silence heavy with unspoken emotions. The first step toward healing had been taken, but the road ahead would be long and uncertain. The truth had been revealed, and Natalie's mask had finally shattered. What we would build from the pieces remained to be seen. Rachel's arrival broke the heavy silence that had fallen over the living room. She entered cautiously, her eyes immediately finding mine, silently asking if I was okay. I gave her a small nod, and she straightened her shoulders, approaching my parents with the quiet dignity that had sustained us both through the darkest times. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, she said, extending her hand. I'm Rachel. It's good to finally meet you properly. My mother ignored the offered hand and instead pulled Rachel into an awkward embrace. Please call me Martha, she said, her voice thick with emotion. And I'm so sorry. So very sorry for everything. My father shook Rachel's hand formally, his shame evident in his inability to meet her eyes directly. Gerald, he said simply. Thank you for being there for our son when we weren't. The next few hours were filled with difficult conversations. My parents wanted to know everything they had missed: our life in Denver, my career progress, Rachel's work at the Children's Hospital. I shared some details, carefully censoring the darker periods, the nights spent in therapy working through the abandonment issues their rejection had triggered. Before we left that evening, we established some ground rules for moving forward. There would be no pretending the past 5 years hadn't happened. No rushing to restore the relationship to what it had been before. We would take small steps, beginning with regular phone calls, perhaps a visit to Denver in a few months if things progressed well. And Natalie? My mother asked hesitantly as we prepared to leave. What about your relationship with her? That's up to her, I said honestly. If she's willing to acknowledge what she did, to apologize sincerely and get help for whatever drove her to such extremes, I'm open to reconciliation eventually. But I won't expose myself or Rachel to more manipulation and lies. My father nodded soberly. We've enabled her behavior for too long. That stops now. We'll be having our own difficult conversation with her when she calms down enough to return. In the weeks that followed, Natalie refused to acknowledge her role in the deception. According to my parents, she continued to insist that Brett had manipulated or falsified the evidence, that I was turning them against her out of long-standing jealousy. When they didn't accept these explanations, she escalated to threats, tears, and finally stonewalling. 3 weeks after our confrontation, she moved out of my parents' house and took an apartment in another city 2 hours away. She maintained minimal contact with them but refused to be in any situation where I might be present. In her absence, my relationship with my parents began the slow process of repair. Our first phone calls were awkward, punctuated by long silences and careful navigation around sensitive topics. But gradually, the conversations became more natural. My mother began sending occasional care packages to our home in Denver, books she thought we might enjoy, homemade cookies that had been my childhood favorite, small tokens that represented her attempt to bridge the gap she had helped create. My father, never as verbally expressive as my mother, showed his remorse in practical ways. When I mentioned during a call that we were considering renovating our kitchen, he sent detailed plans he had drawn up based on the dimensions I provided, along with a significant check marked "Wedding gift, 5 years overdue." The money wasn't important. Rachel and I were financially stable, but the gesture represented his acknowledgement of all they had missed, all they had chosen to miss based on Natalie's lies. For months after the confrontation, my parents visited us in Denver. The initial moments were tense. My mother cried when she saw our home for the first time, realizing tangibly that we had built an entire life without them. But the 3-day visit was healing for all of us. They met our friends, saw my office, experienced the life we had created in their absence. On their last evening, as we sat on our back deck watching the sunset paint the distant mountains, my father said quietly, "You've done well for yourself, Garrett. Without any help from us. I'm proud of the man you've become." It was perhaps the most direct compliment he had ever given me, and it meant more than I could express. Rachel squeezed my hand under the table, knowing what those words meant to me. Individual family members gradually reached out as the truth spread through our extended family network. Aunts, uncles, cousins, some apologetic for believing Natalie's lies, others claiming they had always had doubts. I accepted these reconnections with cautious optimism, understanding that rebuilding trust would be a long process on all fronts. 1 year after the confrontation, Rachel and I shared news that brought genuine joy back into our family relationships. We were expecting a baby. My mother's tearful happiness when we told her seemed to wash away some of the lingering pain between us. She immediately began planning a trip to help after the baby was born, asking rather than assuming what we would need, respecting the boundaries we had established. Natalie remained the one unresolved element in our family story. She had moved again, this time to Florida, where she had apparently begun a new relationship. She sent a terse congratulatory text when she heard about the pregnancy but made no effort to reconcile or acknowledge her past actions. I had accepted that this might be the extent of our relationship going forward, distant awareness of major life events, but no meaningful connection. The birth of our daughter Lily 7 months later became a powerful symbol of new beginnings. My parents arrived 2 days after she was born, tentative in their new grandparent roles but clearly overjoyed. Watching my father hold his granddaughter for the first time, his weathered hands gentle against her tiny body, I felt the last hard edges of resentment begin to soften. "She has your eyes," he said, looking up at me with an expression I had rarely seen on his face, pure, unguarded love. "And hopefully her mother's common sense," I replied, smiling at Rachel, who was watching the scene from her hospital bed. Over the following months, as we adjusted to parenthood and my parents embraced their role as grandparents, I found myself reflecting often on the journey that had brought us to this point. The betrayal had been devastating, the years of separation painful beyond words. But without those experiences, would I have developed the same resilience? Would Rachel and I have formed the unbreakable bond that carried us through the darkest times? Would I have learned the importance of standing firmly in my truth, even when everyone around me doubted? I also thought about Natalie, wondering what wounds she carried that had led her to such destructive behavior. The jealousy she had expressed during our confrontation suggested a lifetime of perceived slights and comparisons that existed primarily in her mind. While this didn't excuse her actions, it helped me understand them as the product of deep-seated insecurities rather than pure malice. 2 years after Lily's birth, we received news that Natalie had begun therapy. My mother shared this information cautiously, knowing my wariness about anything involving my sister. But I was genuinely glad to hear it. Whatever her issues with me, with our family, with herself, professional help was a positive step. For my part, I had learned powerful lessons about forgiveness, trust, and family that would shape how I raised my own daughter. Forgiveness, I discovered, was not a single act but a continuing choice. Some days it came easily, other days the memories of pain would surface, and I would have to consciously choose again to move forward rather than backward. Trust, once broken, never returned to its original innocent state. I maintained a certain watchfulness with my parents that hadn't existed before, a protective instinct that flared especially strong when it came to their relationship with Lily. I was determined that she would never experience the kind of rejection I had endured, even as I encouraged her relationship with her grandparents. And family. I had learned that family could be both our greatest strength and our greatest vulnerability. Blood ties created obligations but not character. My daughter would grow up knowing that love should be consistent and trustworthy, not conditional and capricious. As for my relationship with my parents, we had found a new equilibrium. Not the unquestioning closeness of my childhood, but something more mature, more honest, and in some ways, more meaningful. They had seen the worst of themselves reflected in my experience, and had chosen to face that truth rather than deny it. I had experienced the depth of their fallibility, and chosen to allow them the opportunity to make amends. The truth had indeed shattered Natalie's carefully constructed mask, revealing the insecurities and manipulations beneath. But it had also provided the opportunity for genuine healing, for relationships built on honesty rather than comfortable illusions. 5 years of pain had led to a life of greater authenticity, deeper appreciation for loyalty, and clearer understanding of what truly matters. So what would you do if your own blood betrayed you, then expected forgiveness when their lies finally caught up to them? There's no simple answer. Each betrayal is unique, each relationship complex in its own way. But I believe the path forward always begins with truth, painful, liberating truth that breaks down false narratives and creates space for something real to grow in their place. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you experienced family betrayal? How did you handle it? Did you choose forgiveness, boundaries, or something else entirely? Don't forget to like this video if you found my story meaningful, subscribe for more real-life experiences, and share with someone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Remember, sometimes the hardest truths lead to the most authentic healing. Thank you for listening to my story.